Good morning. Can you hear me all right? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Well, before we get started, any questions about the quiz or the readings?
I had a quick question about the quiz, actually.
All right.
What can we do to see the answers? Do we just have to meet with you one-on-one to like go over which one we got wrong, or?
Yeah, we could do it in class too.
Okay, that'd be
It's
helpful
just
because
easier.
I missed one, but I wasn't sure which one because it obviously, as you know, it just hides all of them.
Right. Well, let me pull it up here. We can just go through it. I'm fine doing this every week also, but if you just give me a reminder, that'd be great because I don't think about it. All right. Oh, it's not going to let me take it from scratch again. Okay, that's all right. So, natural selection is non-random selection of random mutations. Okay. Well, genetic drift is random selection of random mutations. Which mechanism is the best explanation for why sickle cell allele, even though it's harmful, can reach high frequencies? Heterozygote advantage. Okay. Arms, forelegs, flippers, wings. Those skeletons are blank that represent variations on a structural theme. They're homologous to each other. Probably a lot of people put analogous on this one.
That's I put analogous on that one.
Yeah.
Can we go over question 2?
Why heterozygote advantage?
Yeah, I was a little confused about it.
Can you briefly explain to me what sickle cell anemia is?
So sickle cell anemia is where it is like the cell doesn't, or the blood cells don't like take in the oxygen quite properly or something like that.
Because they're the wrong shape. They look like a
Yeah.
sickle. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about this in class. It's really bad to have sickle cell anemia. Um, obviously, your blood cells are the wrong shape. Now, it's a simple yes or no genetic variant. And since you're diploid, you've got two alleles for this. I'm guessing that you probably have two alleles for normal blood cell shape. Okay. If you have two alleles for sickle cell, it's really bad. Your prognosis is pretty poor, but you could also be heterozygous. So one parent could have given you the sickle cell allele and the other given you a normal functioning blood cell allele. In that case, you do have some of the problems of sickle cell anemia, but you're making regular blood cells as well.
Is that an incomplete dominance thing, or is it more of a co-dominance?
It's a co. Yep.
Or
Now, this is still bad for you, right? If you don't have two good copies of that allele, you've got one bad one. That's not good. But if malaria is present in your environment, you're essentially immune to it. Okay? So you get the benefit of being more or less immune to malaria without all of the health complications that come with being homozygous for sickle cell. And so this is a heterozygote advantage. So where malaria is present, there's actually, the environment's actually selecting for the heterozygotes. That's like the best thing to be in that environment. Okay. You take away malaria and sickle cell allele goes away because you're still less fit overall than somebody with 2 good copies. So that's a heterozygote advantage.
Number 1, the answer was random and random, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is to say, I mean, natural selection is absolutely non-random. It's selecting. Okay? It's picking from variants non-randomly. Now, genetic drift is picking from those random variants randomly. We'll see an example of that today also. Then this one, I'm betting people put analogous, a lot of you. What's the difference between analogous and homologous?
Homologous
is. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So homologous is where they share common ancestry, and so that's why it's similar. But analogous would be if it's they have like similar function, or they're like they have different ancestors, but they kind of they come to the similar structure because of their I don't
like
know.
Convergent evolution.
Yeah, convergent evolution.
Yeah, so both of them are things that look alike, right? Wings, for example. The difference is why they're alike. For homologous, they're similar because of shared ancestor who also had that trait, and it's been passed down and just kind of diverged a little bit. And analogous is they independently evolved that thing. And so here, since these are all mammals present in their common ancestor, it means homologous. All right, question number 4, which is not an observation upon which natural selection is based. Poorly adapted individuals never produce viable offspring. Does that make sense? How about better question? Does it not make sense? And if so, what can I do to clear it up? All right, everyone's cool on that. All right, DNA sequences in many human genes are pretty much the same in chimpanzees. This is most likely because they shared a relatively recent common ancestor. All right. Any other questions about the chapter materials? How are you studying for these quizzes?
I just read the chapters.
Okay. Well, that's.
I mean, I'm skimming it a little bit, so because I mean, some of them I know already, but I probably should have gone into depth or more depth, which is why I missed the sickle cell anemia thing.
Yeah. So skimming the chapter can be okay if you skim it a couple times, and if you pay attention to all those little like big box inserts where it's like a 2-page spread on sickle cell anemia, that kind of stuff. You know, those are important. And then hit the back of the chapter, do all of those questions back there. It's got practice questions for you. Do them all. That really, really helps out with the quizzes. All right.
To those practice questions, are there also like answers found in the back of the textbook?
Yeah.
Great.
All right, what are we looking at here?
Are points to get an A?
Not to get an A.
This is your choice
It's
points.
just the your choice points. So I'm showing you where everybody is on this. There are, I believe, 6 of you that have done nothing, including the first assignment. Okay. Most of you have done that first 10-point assignment, the syllabus one, and then nothing else. And then we've got some good achievers here, stacking up points, and then the overachievers. All right, check out this weirdo. Already crossed the 100-point threshold. Pretty much done with assignments for the rest of the semester. All right, so you don't want to be down here in the blue. That was your friendly reminder. Okay. Are we ready to roll? So I've found it important to kind of step back early in the semester and talk a bit about the nature of science as we get into mechanisms of evolution. Okay, so we're going to look at what the nature of science is, the words that we use in the scientific method that might be a bit different from colloquial use of those terms. We'll look at Lamarckian versus Darwinian evolution, look at artificial selection, and then move into gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection. Okay. Then we'll kind of take a look at natural selection. So here we've got the nature of science, where you observe some stuff, these facts, you form hypotheses, you test them, those become theories, and then eventually become a law. Everyone cool with this?
So I don't know if I know the difference between theories and law, but because what I've heard in science is that like there's like supported theories, like gravity is technically just like a theory type of thing.
Okay. I'm glad you admitted this. Most people don't know the difference between a theory and law, and they think they do, which is a dangerous place to be. Okay. This is not the nature of science. We don't move from facts to hypotheses to theories to laws. These are all very different things. And so you're onto a very important question. Here's how we define them. Facts are just observations. Okay. You notice something, that's a fact. All right, you observe it. You measure the length of your TV screen, you've got a fact about it. You made an observation. Okay. Now, laws are detailed descriptions of some aspect of nature based on repeated observation. All right, so laws are like grown-up facts, pretty much. They tend to take the form of like a mathematical equation. Okay, they're describing nature based on repeated observation. Now, a hypothesis is a potential explanation for those observations. All right. To be valid, it's got to be testable and falsifiable. If you can't prove it wrong, it's not a valid hypothesis. It's a waste of your time. Note the difference there. Laws are describing things. Hypotheses are attempting to explain them. There's a difference between a description and an explanation. And then a theory is the detailed explanation for observations. Okay. Past countless tests, we've tried to prove it wrong. It, in theory, can be proven wrong, but we just haven't been able to over and over and over, and it makes useful predictions that we can use. So with the gravity example, we can look at this. We can make observations that things fall down. Okay. What would the law of gravity be pictured here, this equation? How do we arrive at that just from making observations?
You drop something, it falls.
Great. Can you get more specific though? Because that would just be an observation at that point.
Maybe like you drop something in every, like drop something of different weights and it all falls at the exact same like time.
Okay. So you, yeah.
So it'd be, over time you made a lot of different observations by testing these, using your hypothesis in order to test and observe those facts in order to get reliable and like computable data so that you could put it into like that formula that we have for gravity.
Okay, I don't like your use of the word hypothesis for eccentric reasons that we'll get into, but a hypothesis is an explanation. That's a potential explanation, and we're just talking about the observations. We're describing things. So you would drop the apple, measure how long it takes to fall a certain distance. Okay. You would drop the dumbbell, measure how long it takes. Countless measurements over and over and over, and then you've got a description of the force of gravity. Okay. You've got how far apart things are from each other, this radius squared. You've got a gravitational constant. You've got the two masses of the object, and that gives you the force of gravity. It's just a description of how things are attracted to each other physically. Okay. It describes their behavior. Okay. Now the hypothesis would be, okay, now come up with a potential explanation for why things move towards each other. Do you have one?
Aristotle says it's because love, just to put that on the table.
Okay. I don't know that
I don't know if it's only factually correct.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to hold up to testing or if it's even a valid hypothesis, if it's testable.
That's his universal attractor of masses before there was gravity,
Yeah. What's that stupid book, The Law of Universal Attraction, whatever?
It's like that, but drawn out better.
Not quite as stupid. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I can't see what's underneath the picture. Can you go back a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah. So we're looking for a potential explanation for why this equation works.
Could it be that if a mass is large enough, it will attract other masses to it?
Why?
Because it's large.
Why? Why does that matter?
Well, I'm pretty sure I understand this concept, but it has to do with the space-time continuum, and it's bending time, which causes a gravitational force. Isn't that right?
Maybe that's a potential explanation, and hasn't been falsified yet. But there are competing explanations also. Essentially, we don't have a really good. We've got several hypotheses out there, but none of them has graduated to become a theory, this detailed explanation. So you can say the bigger the masses are, the more gravitational force there will be. But you're still just describing things mathematically at that point. That's still just the law. So we can have the law and not have an explanation for it. And so here, this theory of gravitation doesn't actually exist because there are competing hypotheses that could equally be, either one could be correct. We haven't been able to pick between them. Okay, so.
Does there have to be a reason for the law?
Well, shouldn't there be? Don't you want to understand the universe?
Isn't it sufficient to know that it does that?
Okay, it is. For you, maybe it's sufficient to know that it does that, but laws aren't as good as theories. They're not as useful. They can be pretty useful, don't get me wrong. Like, we may not have a good universally accepted theory of gravitation right now, but the law is accepted, and it's good enough to, get a rocket ship to Mars based on this equation right here. And so, yeah, it's useful, but the thing about theories is that they make useful predictions. Okay? Laws don't. Okay, so we want to have a theory so that we can make predictions outside of the scope of the equation itself. So what I want to emphasize here is that theories do not become laws. This is a major misconception that I get every semester with science students. They think that laws are kind of like the pinnacle of the scientific method. No, not really. Theories are. Okay. Good hypotheses grow up to become theories. Bad hypotheses fail and get thrown out. Good observations and facts grow up to become laws. Right? So theories don't become laws. Say it to yourself twice a day if that's what you need. It just doesn't happen. All right, so for these theories, we use the term differently, right, than in common everyday use. Okay, you watch CSI and somebody says, "I've got a theory about." No, you don't. It's not how, that's not how scientists use the word theory. Okay, theories have already passed all the tests. It's a hypothesis that could not be disproved no matter what we tried, and it makes useful predictions that work. So some other examples of scientific theories.
So why wouldn't that the theory of the space-time continuum bending creating gravity, if you said it hasn't been falsified yet, why wouldn't that be a theory?
Well, because there's competing hypotheses, like the
Okay.
gravitron. Yeah, and so if there's multiple hypotheses out there that haven't been disproved to try to explain the same phenomenon, we don't know which one, neither one can be a theory
Okay.
until all other potential explanations have been tossed out. Okay. Now, theories can be disproved. We can get new observations and new data and say, oh, wait, here's another potential explanation we didn't consider before. Okay, and in light of that, let's relook at this theory. But theories are pretty solid for a reason. Okay, we've got the theory of plate tectonics, the germ theory of disease, the oxygen theory of combustion, the theory of heliocentrism, okay, the electron theory of electricity. Right? These are all theories. Okay, we don't really have a good one for gravity yet, but physicists are working hard on that, making progress. Turns out that their experiments are really expensive. Okay, take a long time. So this is how scientists use the term theory. Okay. It's not how we hear it in everyday use, right? You may say, oh, the germ theory of disease. Do germs cause disease? It's just a theory.
So when you say that theories are useful, do you mean that in the sense that they help us understand other things in like surrounding environments?
Other things outside of the scope of the like math equation
Okay, yeah.
kind of setting, yeah. Theories are useful in that the theory of plate tectonics, for example, it makes useful predictions about where earthquakes are going to happen, right? It makes useful predictions about when volcanoes are going to erupt. All that rides on this explanation for why there are earthquakes and why there are volcanoes and why the continents look like they fit together like puzzle pieces. Well, the theory, the explanation we have for that, our best explanation is plate tectonics. Okay. And that we live on a cooling crust that's floating around on a really hot internal core. So are you going to bet against plate tectonics? You're going to stand on that hill and say, no, I don't buy this. It's just a theory. How about the germ theory of disease? I give you a bowl of E. coli. You're going to eat it? No, right? These are good explanations. Right? That's what a theory is all about. Which takes us into evolution, which frankly is just a boring fact. Okay. In and of itself, the observation of evolution isn't super useful. All right. So evolution is a fact. Natural selection is a theory that explains it. Okay. Have I lost anyone on that?
So that's why people would say evolution by natural selection.
Yes, by natural selection. Yeah. So we've known about evolution for, since the 1700s. We've seen species change. We knew about the fossil record, all that good stuff. In the 1800s, we watched moths change their color to like fit the industrialization of London. That is something we've known about, but the answer as to why eluded us for quite some time. Okay. And then the best explanation came along, which was natural selection. So it's explaining the evolution that we observe out there. And it generates predictions. Okay. Other mechanisms like mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, sexual selection, all of these are also valid ways to evolve, but typically we talk about natural selection as being probably the strongest of these mechanisms. Okay. So back in the day, people were trying to figure out the why for evolution. They knew that species change. They weren't immutable, okay? Scientists knew this, at least. And whether the public was willing to admit it or not, the science has shown that species change over time, okay? But why? So initially, one of the first things that came out was, Lamarck. You probably heard of this guy. That he said that variation is acquired. Okay, so offspring are known to resemble their parents, at least somewhat, to certain degrees. And so Lamarck gave the example of a giraffe getting its long neck. The fossil record showed that it did, but the explanation was out there to find. And so he said they're stretching their necks to reach higher leaves on the tree because there's competition for limited resources. So as they stretch their necks over their life, when they have offspring, their offspring will be born with the stretched out neck. Okay, this is analogous to me saying, like, I'm gonna do dumbbell curls with my left arm every day, all day long for the rest of my life. Then when I have a kid, that kid's gonna be born with a giant left arm. Right.
Is there anything that kind of follows that with like fetal hunger syndrome?
Yes. We'll see that in just a second. All right.
Cool.
So yeah, Lamarck came up with this idea. It was a decent try. I guess he didn't really think it through that well. But then again, they didn't know anything about genes at all at that time. And Darwin's book on the origin of species posited a different thing, which was that there is variation, and somehow that variation is inherited rather than acquired. Okay, so there was some mystical force or a molecule or something that was kind of passed from parents to offspring, and it wasn't always exactly the same, and so that you inherit the variation. Now, Lamarck wasn't entirely wrong. The giraffe example was pretty dumb, but we've got plants, for example. Okay. In plants, the offspring can have acquired traits passed on to it. Plants do this weird thing where they don't have a segregated germline. I guess maybe animals are the weird ones here. But any cell from a plant can become any other cell in that plant. This is how plant tissue culture works, right? You can take a little piece of the leaf and put it in the right growth medium, give it the right conditions, and it'll spring roots. And it'll grow a brand new plant out of that. And so plants that acquire mutations throughout their lifetime can actually pass those on to their offspring. Now, another one, you brought this up with like fetal hunger syndrome. There's an interesting example in mice. And this is a fairly recent study. They took these mice, reared them in captivity, isolated, away from their parents, right? So they're born, they shuttle them off to their own little cage and stick them in there, and then they introduce them a brand new smell, never found in nature, right? So these biologists went to some organic chemists and said, we need a brand new smell, something that doesn't exist in nature. And the organic chemists were like, that sounds awesome. And they made one. Okay, so they developed this brand new smell. So they've never ever encountered this in the history of all evolution. And they piped this smell into the mouse cage and then showed it a picture of a cat and loud noise, and they scared the crap out of this poor mouse. Okay. So what's the point of that?
To associate cats with that smell or danger with that smell?
Yeah, they're trying to get this mouse to be afraid of that smell, essentially. Okay, so, you know, they hooked up and measured cortisol levels and stress and all this kind of stuff, and they ascertained that they had officially made these mice afraid of this smell. Okay. Then they bred them and took their babies away, isolated them, and they introduced this smell to the babies. What do you think happened?
Not enough genetic history is my guess. If I'm
You would
taking a
guess
guess.
that. You would, and you'd be wrong. The babies were born afraid of this smell. Without showing them a cat picture or the loud noises, they got the same stress response that their parents had learned. And so this learned behavior had actually been passed on to their children. The genetic code didn't explain it whatsoever. They did full sequencing on these. What they did find was that DNA methylation was able to be passed on. And so Lamarck was kind of right on accident in that some acquired traits can be heritable. Okay, this did go away after like 4 more generations, I think. That methylation was lost, but some of this stuff does get passed on. These are kind of like
What is that called again? The syndrome?
DNA methylation. Is that?
Or just like the was it fetal hunger syndrome or something?
Oh, that's a different story.
I
Oh,
don't
that's
think I said
different.
it right. I think it's starvation syndrome or something like that.
Oh.
It's the same sort of thing where like things that you do to yourself or are done to you can actually affect your offspring. And it's because of this DNA methylation. We call this epigenetics. It's having its 15 minutes of fame right now. A lot of research is going into epigenetics.
If you're looking
outside of the genome, epigenetics. And so you're getting traits from your parents, as it turns out, that aren't just the genes themselves, but it's how those genes are being expressed because of ultra-coiled methylated DNA.
So would that go along with the example of like if like alcoholism ran in your family, you might be predisposed to becoming an alcoholic or something like that?
No, that's the genetics, not the epigenetics. Yeah, there are genes that predispose people towards addiction.
So would you say it's like you need to like live your life, like do the most like novel things, like learn how to do as many things, so like that would help your offspring, I guess?
I don't know that we understand it nearly enough to say whether that's the case or not. We're still at the point now where we're like scaring mice.
Yeah, pretty
yeah. So give it 20, 30 years maybe, you know. It's the same thing with like the genome testing. You get 23andMe. You know, they test your genome and they say, oh, you're this much % greater chance of breast cancer or whatever. Well, no, it doesn't actually work that way. We don't know all the genes that go into it, and so they're kind of selling a bit of snake oil there. So any recommendations we make about epigenetics right now is probably going to be snake oil. I'd be real suspect of that. Okay, but these are kind of the outlying cases. We're going to focus in on some of the more genetic-based types of evolution. And we're going to start out with natural selection as the most powerful. So looking at natural selection, sometimes the easiest way to understand this is artificial selection, which basically is the same thing, just done by humans on purpose, or even on accident, I guess. So we've got this wild mustard plant called Brassica oleracea. Okay. Humans have selected for different traits in this. And cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, and cauliflower are all the exact same species, and they are wild mustard. They can still interbreed with each other. Hybridize, no problem. Okay. What's it mean to select for lateral buds here in Brussels sprouts? How do we go from this plant at the top to Brussels sprouts? By selecting.
I guess it would be
I'm interested
breeding the ones together that have the bigger lateral buds, or just like the more appealing of like whatever trait. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, breeding or like seed saving, for example. So like here's a mustard that's got a bunch of lateral buds. Okay, so you take seeds from that. Its offspring are more likely to have those lateral buds also. And then of the best of those, you save the seeds. And of the best of those. And so after generation, eventually you start getting things that look like the way you want them to. Okay. The banana here, this is a wild banana pictured on the top. Has anyone tasted one of those? It tastes like an acorn. It's awful. Okay. Saps all the life out of your mouth. This is a artificially selected banana. We selected these bananas, this Cavendish banana, so far that it doesn't even make fertile seeds anymore. You can see with a microscope the little tiny seeds in your banana when you eat it, but they're not fertile. They can't produce a new offspring. So all those Cavendish bananas that you've eaten are genetic clones of each other, and they're propagated through tissue culture, not by seed. Pictured on the bottom, we've got modern corn and its wild ancestor, teosinte. Okay. And of course, we've got the wolf and dog conundrum, right? Pugs and Portuguese water dogs are also still just wolves, just selected by humans. So this is kind of like an on-purpose thing. I'm going to show you a little video of an accidental artificial selection.
Every year, on the 24th of April, their descendants proceed to the Akama Shrine, which contains the mausoleum.
Can you hear this okay?
7-year-old emperor.
Yeah.
All right.
There, they conduct a ceremony of remembrance for the life and death of the Heike warriors. But there's a strange postscript to this story. The fishermen say that the Heike samurai wander the bottom of the inland sea still, in the form of crabs. There are crabs to be found here which have curious markings on their backs, patterns which resemble a human face with the aggressive scowl of a samurai warrior from medieval Japan. These Heike crabs, when caught, are not eaten. They're thrown back into the sea in commemoration of the doleful events of the Battle of Dano Ura.
All right. How is it that we have crabs with the face of a samurai woodcut on their back?
Because they only threw the ones that vaguely looked like that back after the 1,000 years of doing it.
Yeah, and it has been about 1,000 years. And so this is just a cultural thing where it was kind of taboo culturally to eat the crabs that looked like they had a bit of a samurai face on them. Okay. The first crabs 1,000 years ago probably didn't look exactly like this with a distinctive like samurai woodcut look. Okay. But people have been fishing in the Sea of Japan in this bay, the Heike Bay, for 1,000 years, been eating crabs, but every time they see one that may or may not kind of look like a samurai, they throw it back. And so what that means is that if you're a crab with some folds on your carapace that kind of look like a face, you get to live. The chances of your survival go up. Okay, so that is artificial selection also, just accidental. Humans being the selective agent. Okay, it's different from natural selection in that it's actually exactly the same. It's just that humans are involved. So since we're super special, we get our own term. Now, we've got other mechanisms of evolution. Okay, mutation in and of itself. Okay, that's a mechanism. So you go from one population and somebody acquires the mutation, boom, that population has evolved. Okay. Gene flow, this is immigration and emigration. So genes moving from one population to another. Then you've got genetic drift, that's the random one, where it's chance events killing off or selecting between things. And then natural selection, which we've been talking about, where there's a distinctive selective pressure for or against some alleles. Now, all of these have something in common, that they are populations. Evolution does not work on individuals, it works on populations. And how do we define evolution? The book gave a literal definition of evolution.
Isn't it just the change in allele frequencies?
Yep, it's the change in allele frequencies in a population over time. So if we look at these four, we've got our population here on the left of these two beetles. Okay, one of them gets a mutation. That's a new allele, and so that's changed the frequency of alleles in that population. So the mutation is evolution. Okay. Gene flow. We've got a population here on the left. The allele frequency is 5 to 1 for green to brown. And then we get an immigrant from another population. Now it's 5 to 2. That's a new frequency for that allele, and so that population has evolved. Okay. Genetic drift. We've got a 4 to 3 brown to green allele frequency. Some careless dude comes along and accidentally steps on the only 3 green bugs, and suddenly we've got 100% brown. Okay. You following me on this so far? These are the 4 mechanisms we're going to take a look at. You should be able to see how these are actually evolution, because the allele frequencies in each population has changed over time. With our last 2 minutes, 1 minute, I'll just stop it there for questions before we press on, looking deeper at each of these mechanisms.
So with natural selection, do you think a lot natural selection on humans has actually stopped because of first world care?
Probably not.
You don't think so?
No, our heads are still getting bigger every generation.
Oh, I thought you meant theoretically, like
No,
hypothetically.
no, for real. Like our skull size is still increasing all around the world. First world care has slowed down some of the other selective agents out there. But keep in mind that a lot of them were actually more of a genetic drift situation than natural selection. So in 1750, you're out farming and you cut your arm on your plow. What happens to you?
You get tetanus.
You get tetanus and you die. Yeah. Okay. You're dead. That didn't have anything to do with your genes necessarily. Tetanus is just going to kill you. And so it's not that the environment is picking from a bunch of different genetic variance in that case. It's just like accidental, you got cut. Okay, so it might not be as natural selection as you think when you start looking at kind of what has been killing humans until what 10,000 years ago. The number one cause of death for humans was, anyone know?
Heart disease.
Nope.
Other humans?
Nope.
Or like animals?
Mosquitoes.
Starvation?
Tooth
Cancer?
infection. Tooth infection.
Tobacco?
People didn't live long enough to get cancer 10,000 years ago because they died from a tooth infection before then, or a cut on their hand or something like that. I mean, the average lifespan was 40. You could be lucky if you lived to be 40 years old because of all the other stuff around it. And so things like cancer weren't wiping people out because most people don't get cancer until you're older. You've had chances to acquire those mutations. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that has been killing off humans historically wasn't necessarily, I mean, some of it was obviously, but it wasn't necessarily genetic based. All right.
I mean,
We're out of time. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, people can leave if they want. It's just I've heard that there's like natural immunity to certain diseases. Like there was with like consumption or aka tuberculosis. There was like a case like way back when where like all the family died except for the dad, and like he just had immunity somehow because I mean he was around all of them.
And in that case, yes, that is natural selection because it's acting on the genomes, the underlying genomes. So look at it this way, like if a volcano erupts and you get swallowed in a magma river, does it matter whether you're immune to malaria or not?
No.
Yeah, you're gone, all right, forget it. And so the
Yeah,
magma,
but that's kind of genetic drift, isn't it?
yeah, it's genetic drift. And so if that's the difference, the way to kind of tell, is this genetic drift or is it natural selection, is it selecting between genetic variants? Does it matter what your genome is for this selective event or not? If it does matter, then it's natural selection. If it doesn't, then it's genetic drift.
Also, are immune systems like genetic in any way?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I
There
mean
have been people
theoretically
immune to
that
the
like
plague.
or like infection sort of thing would like if you genetically have a better immune system, it would be better.
Yeah. Diseases are very often natural selection events, very strong and horrible ones. But like the Black Plague, you know, it killed a lot of people, but some people actually were immune to it. They're the ones that survived and had offspring. All right. Well, I'll see you Wednesday. We'll pick up talking about kind of the details of natural selection and then take a look at an example. And I'll try to post a link to that video. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's the old Carl Sagan Cosmos, episode 2. All right. Well, I'll see you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.